It's the most romantic book in the Bone Season series, I will
Woohoo.
say. It's not. I wouldn't call the entire series romantasy. Like it's not like
No.
that. It's not like so strong that the romance is like that much of a key element.
No,
throughout
that's
the
a
books.
completely different genre.
Yeah, but I do. It is still a romance. You know, the romance is still an important part of the series, if not the absolute main thing about it. And it's a very slow burn, enemies to lovers romance, and it is the most romantic book in the series so far. And I'm just very happy with how the romance goes
The
in this
library
one.
was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
And
Hi, how are you?
Hi, very good. We're so happy to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here. It's been such a long time since I was in Toronto. I think it's been about 7 or 8 years, actually. So
That
I'd really
is
love to be back.
Too long.
Oh, thank you. I will need that. Also, I'm
Yeah,
so
me
thrilled that I
too.
managed to get up those 2 steps without falling flat on my face.
And
You know-
in heels as well.
I know, you know that thing where, like, I don't know if you do this, but I become very clumsy doing normal things when people are watching. So it's like when there's a whole room of people, I was like, I'm going to forget how to operate stairs. as a
Okay, well now
concept.
you can just sit, so
Yes,
you're
thank
good.
God.
No falling over will be required. We love your work. We
Thank you.
love your work. And we're going to have a Fight Club pit. The people who prefer the Priory of the Orange Tree versus the people who prefer the Bone Season.
Oh, no.
So just to let you know, that's how we're ending the evening. And
Well, the Priory people will win because they're using weapons that big.
you are in the middle of a 3-week-long book tour.
I sure am, yeah. And you got me awake for this one, so feel lucky.
I hear you weren't awake in Washington.
No, so basically, my publicity people were really packed it in for this tour. So I did Edinburgh, Manchester, London, and then the day after London, I did an event in Washington, D.C. And the idea was for me to sleep on the plane, but the very sweet pilot was like, yeah, I'm not going to sugarcoat this, folks. We're going to have turbulence the whole way across the pond.
No.
And by God, the man was right. So the whole plane was just shaking. And I arrived, got to Washington, met up with the lovely Sabata here, who was my moderator. And I was like, mate, I'm not awake. Oh, no. She was asking me very basic questions, such as, what is your book about? And it was like she was asking me for some complex mathematical equation. I was like, what? I'm an author? So yeah, I'm awake now. I went to bed at 8 p.m. last night, and I've had about 10 hours sleep, so I'm now awake.
Oh, sleeping in Canada. I hope it was nice.
Yeah, well, like I said, I've really missed Canada, and I love Canada so much that I've set a little bit of Bone Season 6 there, so I'm excited. Yeah.
Woo! So can you give us a spoiler? Where in Canada?
It's Vancouver.
Oh, all right. Can we pitch you Toronto for book 7?
Maybe. Like, it's still a draft. It could change. I'll think about it.
Book tours are grueling.
Yes, they're fun, but yeah, they can, from someone who likes to sleep, they can be a little grueling sometimes. Yeah.
No doubt. Speaking of grueling, we are here to celebrate the release of The Dark Mirror. Phew!
Finally.
Book 5 in the 7-book Bone Season series.
Mm-hmm.
You began writing this story when you were 19, a student at Oxford. How did that come about? Why? How? So young? Amazing.
Thank you. So I've written since I was about 12. Any story, I just love telling stories. I used to do it all the time. When I was 15, I wrote a novel called Aurora, which was a very silly kind of sci-fi self-insert. And it was basically about 9 aliens who land on planet Earth. They're really hot. And
That sounds great.
The hottest alien, whose name was Warden, this is his origin story, guys. Landed in the garden of a girl who looked suspiciously like me, and he had my middle name as her first name, and also happened to be a student studying English like my good self. So I wrote that book, and that took me about 3 years. I sort of mostly had given up on it by the time I was 17, but I was sort of emotionally attached to it a little bit past that. I tried to get it published, and thank God it wasn't, because it was a hot mess. A lot of agents turned it down, rightfully so. Anyway, so I was very upset and heartbroken about that. And then when I got to Oxford, when I was 19, I wasn't really having the best time at Oxford. I think that one of the issues with Oxford is that you go there thinking that you are, really intelligent, that you're gifted and talented, right? You're the top of all your classes. And then you arrive at Oxford and you realize you are, in fact, incredibly mid. You are very average. You are surrounded by actual geniuses.
It sounds like a very university experience.
Yeah, it's quite a humbling experience. And I did feel very out of my depth there. I came from a state school rather than a private school, so like some of the other students like knew Latin, for example. Like, I'd never had a chance to learn Latin, so I was fascinated by how they all just knew how to speak Latin. So I ended up, for various reasons, my mental state was quite dark while I was at Oxford, and I started imagining it as being this sort of dystopian place where these strange supernatural creatures were forcing young people to endure terrible tests and giving them uniforms. So a funny story about Oxford that I tell, because I feel like Oxford really keeps this on the down low, but when you do your first year of exams at Oxford, they're called preliminary exams or prelims. You get sorted into one of two categories, right? So if you do well in the exam, you get called a scholar. And you get this really nice robe. It's like, it's very artfully draped. You look very posh. If you do not do so well in your exams, as I did not, because I was very tired, you get called a commoner. No one knows this. I feel like I alone am exposing this. It's so bad. And I was a commoner, so I was really upset. And the commoners get like a slightly more rubbish version of the uniform. It's like this weird, like sleeveless robe with these weird, like Batman wings. It's really strange. I'll have to post a photo of it one day. So there was that. And then there's also this tradition at Oxford, which I find better than that one, which is when you do your final exams in third year, you wear flowers on your uniform. So for your first exam, you wear a white flower. The last one, you wear a red flower. And for the ones in the middle, you wear a pink flower. And I think it's supposed to be that the flower's being like slowly stained with ink or your own blood, depending on how you feel. So that ended up being the inspiration for the tunic colours that when Paige takes a different test. So that was one of the two ideas I had that created the Bone season. The other one was that I grew up in London. I've always loved London, and I particularly love this district in Covent Garden, which is like a sort of, I guess like a shopping/theatre district in London. There's a little district called Seven Dials, and Seven Dials is where these streets come together around this very beautiful sundial pillar. And there are lots of shops in the area that sell crystal balls and tarot cards and that sort of thing. So I came up with this idea for a magic system based on clairvoyance and divination, and sort of like an idea for a modern-day witch hunt almost. And those probably could have been two separate books, but I'm nothing if not ambitious, so I put them together, and out came the Bone season. And I wrote it in 6 feverish months in my second year at university. I got my book deal when I was 20, and then it was actually published after I graduated.
That's great. It is amazing.
Thank you.
I want to ask you just one more question about Aurora.
Sure.
Because studying up for this, I listened to many of your other interviews, and there's this great story about how your mom had to take away your keyboard to keep you from writing at night.
Yeah.
So but that didn't stop you.
No, it didn't stop me. No, so like I said, I was a pretty obsessive writer when I was a teenager. I think in one article, I very dramatically referred to it as writing was a drug I couldn't stop taking. Oh. And then they printed that as the headline, and I was like, okay, that makes me sound a little insane. But okay, thanks so much. I would write Aurora like all through the night, and it got to the point where my mum was like, you need to go to school and do your exams, so I'm going to take your keyboard away from you during the night, which made perfect sense, right? Because I was staying up all night. I was staying up till sort of 4 or 5 in the morning, and then having to go to school, and I was completely exhausted because I've been working on this silly alien book all night. And so my mum took the keyboard during the night, but then I found out that there's like a keyboard that you can get that's on the screen, and you can use the mouse to like click individual letters. So I'd be clicking my way through it, being like, and then Warden kissed me. And then my mum would hear the clicking. She would like run out of her room, and in those 5 seconds, seconds, I would leap into bed and like, all the covers on. And so that was the back and forth of me and my mum pretending she didn't realize this was happening. And it was, nowadays I like sleep more, but it was, it was kind of a good time.
You can call it the silly alien book, but it was your apprenticeship.
Yeah.
You couldn't have written the Bone Season without it.
Oh, no, absolutely not. And this is why I always say to aspiring writers, no writing is wasted. Even if something doesn't get published, it teaches you how to write a book. And it was like the blueprint for the Bone Season in a way. Basically all of it I scrapped. But I started developing concepts like the dreamscape in Aurora. Like I said, I had the vague concept of Warden as a character, although modern day Warden would slap that version of Warden. He was really grumpy and really just a little bit, sorry, I had to use the word, a little bit just bitchy. He was very over dramatic. So he meets Rose, one of this character, and within a week of meeting her, he's saying let the universe try to tear us asunder. And I'm like, mate, you met her 5 minutes ago. Calm down. So yeah, now I'm more of a slow burn girl, as you'll know if you read the Bone Season series. But yeah, I had the blueprint of a guy called Warden in that book, who is unlike modern Warden. But yeah, that was where he first came into my head when I was 15. Yeah.
My goodness. The first Bone Season book was released in 2013. Now we're hundreds of thousands of words into it. How do you maintain momentum in a long series?
Okay, so for me, there's two basic ways of writing a long series, right? You can either repeat the same structure roughly over and over again.
In each book?
Yeah, so you have the kind of key events that happen in each book, and you kind of roughly know what to expect. I think this is true of kids fiction particularly. Like in The Worst Witch, which was a series I read when I was young, you always knew that Mildred, the main character, she was going to go to her witch school and she was going to get in some kind of trouble, and there'd been these repeating tropes in each book. And that was kind of comforting. You knew that you were going to get that. There was going to be a different take on the adventure every time, but you had the touch points for each book that you knew were going to be there.
Sure.
The other way that I wanted to do it was to really shake each book up. So I give each book in the Bone Season series a slightly different subgenre. So the first book is a jailbreak, the second is a murder mystery, the third is a heist, the fourth is a kind of political type thriller, and then The Dark Mirror is like an espionage thriller, essentially. So that's how I try to keep the series fresh and exciting, is by really shaking it up. And I'm pretty convinced that readers largely can't guess what's going to happen in the next book because of that. Like, if you haven't read The Dark Mirror, I genuinely think you have no idea what is going to happen at all, because it's that much of a shake-up between books.
Wow. Did you have that planned out? Did you know? Yeah, you did.
Pretty much, yeah, because I just thought, if I'm going to write a series that long, that you have to keep it fresh and exciting, especially because they're, big, chunky books. I think and I would be bored writing the same structure every single time, even though I can see why that would work for some series. It wouldn't work for me as an author. So, yeah, it was always, keep it fresh, keep everyone guessing.
And you planned these out when you were working for a literary agent in London, is that right?
I did, yeah. So that's actually what took me to Seven Dials at that time. So the literary agent I was working for was basically the only agent who was nice to me about Aurora. he was like, I won't be taking this, but it's nice that you tried. Because I was very young. And with some kind of level of boldness that I just don't have now, but I apparently did when I was a teenager, I said, can I come and work for you for 2 weeks? Because I wanted to know what makes an agent reject a book versus pick one up. So I worked as his assistant for a couple of weeks, and it was so interesting. I was doing slush pile duties, so I'd get manuscripts coming in, and I would learn what would make this agent turn things down, or what would make him ask for more of the manuscript, and that. And it was just a really interesting learning process. And I spent 2 weeks in Seven Dials during that time, so it was what made me just sit with that area for quite a while, because I'd walked through it before, or walked near it, but I hadn't really got in touch with the area before that. So,
yeah, and it's a Victorian slum area, right?
It is, yeah. It has a really interesting history. So I think it's actually mentioned by Dickens. It used to have a really bad reputation, and then it was gentrified and developed, I think, in the early late 1900s, maybe, I can't remember. But yeah, it went from being a place that was, really had a bad association to it, and then now it's the opposite of that almost.
So obviously you're a planner and plotter.
Yes.
Very much. So you know how the story is going to go before you write it, but does it ever surprise you? What surprises, what discoveries do you make?
Yeah, I do like to leave a little bit of room to maneuver and to have myself be surprised. So I have a pretty strong synopsis for every book before I start working.
How long?
How long is the synopsis?
Yeah. Just curious.
I'm actually not sure I've done the word count specifically. I wrote a very basic synopsis of the whole series for Bloomsbury when they first picked me up to be published, because they were like, okay, if we're doing a 7-book series, we need to know roughly where it's going. Haven't stuck to every single bit of that synopsis I wrote when I was that young. But yeah, I tend to write a synopsis. It's probably a couple of thousand words. It's relatively detailed. And then I break it down into a chapter plan after that. But I call it dramatically again, I'm a very dramatic person, I call it the flesh and bone structure. So I have the bones of each book, but I like to leave a little bit of room to change the connective tissue if the mood strikes me. And I do like leaving that little bit of room, because otherwise it can feel like sometimes you've planned something for a character, but by the time you actually get to that point, that character might have grown into a slightly different person to who you expected. And I don't want to force them into a mold that I imagined for them years ago, that they just might not fit that mold anymore. Sure. And sometimes I like leaving room for characters to surprise me. And there's a character called Ivy in the series, for example, and she was meant to be a relatively background character, but then she just kept coming to the forefront of my mind, and I just embraced that. And the same, there's a character called Maria who was meant to be even more of a secondary background character. She was just supposed to pop up every now and again and just give Paige a little bit of advice and then disappear. And now she's one of the key characters in the series, because I was just very taken by her, and she sort of forced me to make her into a main character. I didn't really have any power in the matter.
Oh my goodness. What book did she come out in?
The Mime Order, the second book, yeah.
Okay.
And she was really just supposed to be someone that just Paige saw in the background, basically. And then she just had this really strong personality as soon as I wrote her. And yeah, now she's just a really big part of it.
What kind of reactions are you getting from readers about the new book?
The Dark Mirror?
Yeah,
I think
The
they
Dark
look pretty
Mirror.
good so far.
Yeah.
I've been really nervous about the reactions for this one, because it's been a really long time since the last book. And I am a fairly slow writer compared to some of my colleagues. I know that some authors, they'll pump out 1 or 2 books every year. I don't know how quickly you write books.
Not that quickly.
Yeah, it scares me a little. But so, yeah, basically I published The Mask Falling, the 4th book in the series, in 2021. And then this one's obviously not come out until 25, because I wrote A Day of Fallen Night between the two. And that's a very, very long book if you've seen it. So that took a while.
And that's the prequel to
Priory of the Orange Tree. Yeah, and that was written in the pandemic. And, for various, I was slower writer during the pandemic, as I think many of us were. So yeah, I was really nervous about this one coming out, because I thought it was going to have to be really worth that long wait. My real fear is always writing a book that will disappoint readers. So I always put quality over quantity. That's always been a mantra that I've stuck to, and I've been very lucky that I have a readership who are generous enough to give me that time. But when you do get a book by me, even if it takes several years, then just know that I've put my whole soul into it. It's not been half-assed in any way. I've poured over every single sentence. So I'm really glad so far to be seeing a really positive reaction to it, which is lovely.
The reviews are really good.
Yeah, they've been pretty good so far. I've got to tell you about one I saw the other day that I found so funny, though. I think it was from the Daily Mail, and they described Warden as Paige's demon lover. I was like, is he a demon? I guess. And then I told my friends this, and one of them, well, he is kind of from hell. I was like, is he? I think it was probably the glowing yellow eyes, maybe. It just really made me laugh, because I've never thought of him as being a demon before.
That is weird.
Yeah.
That is
So
very
yeah,
strange.
I guess it was said in a positive sense, but
Book 4, The Mask Falling.
Yeah.
You dedicated to your grandmother.
I did, yes.
Yeah, she must have been a really important person.
She was really special to me, my grandma. We had a very close relationship. She was almost like a second mother to me. And she was the only member of my family that actually read my books, because my parents and my brother are very supportive, but they just do not get fantasy conceptually.
Okay.
So an example of when my parents and my brother were really trying, they clearly felt like it was important to me for them to read the book. So we decided to sit down and read the first page of The Priory of the Orange Tree together. And I started reading it out, and I went, okay, chapter 1. The stranger came out of the sea like a water ghost. And my mum went, what the fuck's he doing in the sea? concept of reading. I am going to explain it to you in a second. and then my dad was like, all right, carry on. And then I was like, okay. The stranger came out of the sea like a water ghost, barefoot and wearing the scars of his... Wearing the scars of his... What the fuck does that mean? I was like, oh, fucking hell, I'm done with this. Oh, no. So that's all we ever spoke of it. But my grandma, who also, I don't think really understood that much of fantasy. Like, she wasn't a fantasy reader at all, but she loved the Bone Season series. And I would often get these very passionate calls from my grandfather whenever she was reading the new one. And I remember my grandpa called me one day after The Song Rising, which is the third book in the series. It's quite brutal for Paige. And Grandpa called me and went, Samantha, your grandmother's very upset.
Oh.
I said, okay, and what's happened? And he goes, well, it's apparently something to do with somebody called Paige. Apparently, you've put us through an awful lot of suffering. I was like, okay, Grandpa, cool. And then, she loved Paige. And she was always really upset whenever I did something bad to Paige, which is all the time.
Yeah.
And she loved the relationship between Warden and Paige, and she was always going on about how wonderful he is. And I was genuinely very devastated because she died during the pandemic, and just before the pandemic. And I was so gutted because she'd always been really worried that she wouldn't see the end of the series. And I was racked with guilt about this for years afterwards because I was like so critical of myself for being so slow. And I was always really sad that Grandma didn't see the end of it. And she didn't get to read The Mask Falling either. And it was very nice of my publisher though, because when she was in hospital, she died of cancer. And my publisher, Bloomsbury, actually printed off the novella, The Dawn Chorus, for her to read, because it wasn't ever printed. It's just a digital book. So she did get to read that. And that's actually quite a nice book in comparison to it's not easy to read. It's quite a visceral exploration of trauma, but it is, Arcturus and Paige in a nice safe house, not in a war situation. So I think she was quite happy with that.
Nobody's getting stabbed.
No stabbing, just a lot of emotional pain.
Yeah.
That was really kind of them. And there was no one else I could dedicate the middle book of the series to.
Was it hard to keep writing after you lost her?
Yeah, it was. And I actually wrote it, when she died, I was writing A Day of Fallen Night, which also intersected with my grandfather's death and also with the pandemic. So it was a really, really difficult book for me to write. It's a very emotional book in many ways, and it's also very, very personal. So it's personal partly because it's about, a person accepting and embracing their sexuality like I had done within those few years. And it's also Glorian, who's one of the main characters in A Day of Fallen Night, is very much based on me as a teenager. And so it was just a really, really personal, heavy, emotional book that also happens to be about a pandemic. And I was basing that on the Black Death, but I did not think I would be writing about a pandemic during a pandemic. But we were just talking in the green room earlier, and you said that your book you wrote in the pandemic was much lighter, and I was saying that's a much smarter idea to have written light during the pandemic.
A lot of people had a hard time simply writing during the pandemic. Well, a lot of my friends did.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of your friends did too. It's
not Brandon Sanderson.
No. Apparently not.
A big admiration for the guy, but I think a lot of people wanted to kill him when he came out during the pandemic. He's like, I've written 6 surprise books. I'm like, oh, good for you, Brandon. Good for you.
Strangely, my next question is about workaholism.
Okay, I don't work as hard as Brando Sando, but who does?
No, nobody does. But I don't think you should call yourself a slow writer.
I think I'm slow. I think I'm slow mostly because I think that a lot of us got used to the YA schedule.
Right.
And I think YA authors are largely put under more pressure to write a book every year because there's this idea that their audience is going to age out of their books. And I feel like a lot of very big popular books like The Hunger Games, like Divergent when that came out, they were YA books, and I think people are used to that schedule. So in comparison to that, I feel like a slow author, but I've only ever been able to get out a book every 2 years generally.
That's amazing. Every 2 years is great.
I mean, they're pretty long, to be fair. They're pretty big books.
They're big books.
But yeah, I'm if not very self-critical. But
We
I know
like
logically.
big books.
Yeah, I do like a big book. I do.
In the past, you have described yourself as a workaholic.
Yeah.
Do you still?
Yeah, I think I am. Like, I mean, I feel like one of the reasons that I'm slower, it's also partly because I'm chronically ill. So I have migraines, and I also suffer with endometriosis and adenomyosis. And for those, over the years, that has made me slow down. So I feel like I'm often working against that. And that's another reason A Day of Fallen Night was so difficult, actually, because I hadn't treated my endometriosis at the time, and I was in like constant excruciating abdominal pain, like nearly every day.
Yes.
So now I've had it treated, I feel a little bit better about that aspect. But yeah, I've had migraines since I was 18, so that has slowed me down a little, and I think it's something that frustrates me a lot, because I want to work more than I do, like, 'cause I love my job so much. Like, it's so cool being a full-time author. It's like, it's a dream I used to wish for on stars when I was a little kid, you know. The idea of that actually happening is incredible. I'd like to be faster, I'd like to work harder. I am restricted to some extent by my illness. But yeah, I would still consider myself a workaholic, but like a happy workaholic. Like, I love my job.
It is a dream job,
Yeah.
absolutely. I just want to say, if you are suffering from chronic pelvic pain and your doctor isn't taking it seriously, get a new doctor.
Yeah.
Get a new doctor.
And advocate for yourself. I had to do a lot of advocating for myself. Like, I did not leave the doctors alone. I was like, this is not normal.
Yeah, I demanded a hysterectomy and haven't had a day of pain since.
Yeah. It's nice when you treat it.
Yeah, that's right. You have said that on every book tour you've ever been on, you've been deep in the editing process of a forthcoming novel.
Yeah, often.
I suspect that might be the case again.
I'm drafting for this one, actually.
Oh, you are?
Yes.
You're drafting?
Yeah,
Are you drafting book 6?
Yeah, I am. So I got to write like a Canada bit on set in Canada, which is great. I don't write a ton when I'm on tour anymore. Like, I feel like something has just snapped in me where I just don't find it as easy to write when I travel anymore. I prefer to be able to like sit down and properly immerse myself in a book. But yeah, like, I will do little bits and bobs when I'm traveling. Like, I wrote like a few scenes from Bone Season 6 today, just because I was like excited to be finally writing it. And it's like a very romantic one, and I love writing romantic scenes. Like, those ones just flow out of me. They're so easy to write. I'm not editing this time, although I will be doing the last proofread on my next book, Among the Burning Flowers, when I get back.
That's right. That is the third book in the Priory of the Orange Tree.
So yes and no. So it's the third installment in the cycle. Yeah, but it's not the size of a brick like the other books.
Okay.
So basically, it started off as my editor saying, you know, it'd be really nice to do like a shorter Priory novel. And I think it's partly because Priory has sold wonderfully well, like far better than I expected it to, but a lot of people are very intimidated by it, understandably, because it's this big. And I had expressed like a desire to do a more accessible Roots of Chaos book for people who might be a bit daunted by the bigger ones. So we agreed that I would write a short 10,000 word mini novella.
Okay.
And then I didn't. Well, then, I mean, in my defense, like, I pitched an idea to Bloomsbury, and they said they loved it so much, could I write something a bit longer? So it just ended up growing a little bit, and then it was going to be a novella, so it was 40K, and then it started to inch over that threshold, and now it's 60K, which is a short novel, we're calling it. Yeah, my publishers very artfully pitched it as a Roots of Chaos tale. I don't know what that means. So yeah, it's a shorter Priory book than we're used to.
And it's standalone, obviously.
It's prequel to Priory. I'm calling it a direct prequel to Priory. A Day of Fallen Night is also a prequel to Priory, but it's like so much further back. It's 500 years back, whereas Among the Burning Flowers takes place 3 years before Priory. So it's supposed to pave the way to the Priory of the Orange Tree, and it's about the fall of a country called Iskalin, which at the beginning of the Priory of the Orange Tree, Iskalin has fallen to this religion worshipping dragons, and it's kind of presented as like the evil, scary country. But this is the book that explains how that happened and gives more complexity to it, and it sort of basically gives a bit more richness to some of the secondary characters who appeared in the Priory of the Orange Tree.
How did you end up with 2 series simultaneously?
Okay, so the third book in the Bone Season series, which is called The Song Rising, was very, very difficult for me. Most authors I've spoken to, I don't know if this is the case for you, but they had one book that nearly killed them.
Right.
And for me, that was The Song Rising. It was just really difficult to get right. I think in hindsight, I think it was because I was treating it as a bridge between 2 and 4 rather than as its own individual book. So it lacked a strong backbone for the plot. And I was really struggling with it. It was going back and forth with my editor endless times, and it was getting to the point where I just felt insane and I started to really doubt my ability as a writer because I just felt like I was just really messing this up and I couldn't get it right. Anyway, so while it was with my editor for the umpteenth time, and it would stay with my editor for such a long time, and again, I'm very lucky to be a full-time author, so I really had nothing to do at that time. And I was scrambling about for something else creative to occupy my mind. And I thought to myself, I've always loved dragons, like since I was a kid. And I watched the movie Dragonheart, which I don't know if anyone knows. Thank God, like Dragonheart fans, thank you. It's so underrated. But I was obsessed with that movie when I was a kid. Like I saw it for my 5th birthday at the cinema, and it was just, I was just a huge dragon fan since then.
That's the age when a movie will get you.
Yeah, I had because it was the 90s, I had like a tape recorder, and I recorded it, and like I used to listen to it as like a sort of primitive audiobook when I was 6.
Yeah.
So I could quote that whole movie. I loved it so much. And I was also raised in the Church of England, and I went to a Christian school, and St. George is the patron saint of England, and I always was intrigued by the legend of St. George and the Dragon. And as I got older, I always questioned, like, who is the princess in that story, the damsel that George rescues? And so I started just researching George and the Dragon, and the more versions of the legend I found, the more I was both fascinated by it and actually quite disgusted by certain elements of it. Like it's actually a very like dark, like ugly story in some iterations. Like it's very, there's basically, I found this Elizabethan version by a guy called Richard Johnson. And I think it came out in about 1596. And it basically portrays St. George as like one of the most terrifying people who just imaginable. Like he's profoundly like racist, xenophobic, Islamophobic. He's highly misogynistic, but he's still presented as a hero throughout. Sure. Which is one of the most disturbing things I've ever read. And I suddenly had this fire in me that I just wanted to destroy this guy. So I thought to myself, I want to do a version of this story that Richard Johnson would absolutely hate. I have beef with this man nobody's heard of. He's been dead for 400 years. So I was like, okay, I want to reimagine the legend of George and the Dragon, but in like a completely different, like feminist way that celebrates diversity and people coming together to defeat the dragon rather than just being this like random guy who hates everyone who isn't a white Christian man. So yeah, that's the seed of where the Priory of the Orange Tree was. And I started writing it, and I wrote like X number of words so that my agent could pitch it to Bloomsbury. And I said to my agent, okay, like this is a standalone, it's, you know, just something one-off. And he looked at me and he went, Samantha, you came to me at the age of 20 and said that you wanted to write a 7-book series, and you are expecting me to believe that you can just play in this huge world you're creating once. I was like, yeah. So I went away, sold the book, wrote some more, and then I had to crawl back to him with my tail between my legs, being like, what if I wanted to write another one? So that's how it ended up being 2 series rather than 1. But it was genuinely was supposed to be a standalone.
He's a very supportive editor.
Yeah, no, David's wonderful, my agent. Like he's kind of like I feel like he's like my second dad. I just adore him.
Oh, that's sweet. Do you mind if we do a speed round of silly questions?
Yeah.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Favorite city in the world?
London, hate to say it.
Me too. If you had to be a voyant, what kind would you be?
A psychographer, which is like using like writing to connect with the ether.
Nickname your friends call you?
They don't really, actually.
No.
It's Samantha mostly.
Samantha?
Yeah, I get quite cross with it. I will tell really briefly a funny story.
Yeah.
If anyone follows me on Instagram, you know that my handle is say_Shannon, which is kind of weird. Like it looks like it should be Sam Shannon. The reason it's Say Shannon is because when I was like in the early days of uni, I suddenly decided I wanted to be an edgelord, and I decided that I didn't want to be called Sam or Sammy or anything like common like that. I wanted to be something cool. So I Googled like cool nicknames for Samantha. And somebody was like, how about say? And then I went to my friends who had called me Sammy at that time. And I said, guys, I need you to call me Say. And I changed all my Twitter, like my Twitter handle, all of that stuff. And then my friends went, there is absolutely no way that we're calling you Say, you weirdo. And then I just kept my Twitter handle how it was. And then I got my little blue tick on Twitter, and I was like, oh no, I can't change it now.
No.
So yeah, all of my social media just stayed as Say Shannon, and then bloody Elon Musk took my blue tick away anyway. so you know, I'm just Say Shannon. That's the reason. It's nothing clever. It really is just that dumb. So yeah, the nickname my friends don't call me is Say.
My goodness. Beautiful pens or beautiful notebooks?
Beautiful notebooks, and I have too many of them.
All right. Which world would you rather live in, the Bone Season world or the Priory of the Orange Tree world?
I guess Priory, because there's some. Although the Bone Season world is essentially our world outside Scion, so I'm gonna say. No, actually, you know what? I'm gonna say Bone Season because the Priory world has a volcano that spits out fire-breathing dragons who spread a plague every few hundred years.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go with Bone Season.
Yeah. Okay. I want to ask the audience for that as well. Applaud if you'd rather live in the Bone Season world.
There you go. Some people are sensible.
And applaud if you would rather live in the Priory of the Orange Tree world.
Okay, it's pretty even split,
That's
actually.
even.
Yeah.
That's an even
Well,
split.
because Priory World has dragons, like, but cool dragons.
Yeah.
But then it also has, like, kill you dragons. So it's like, which one are you going to get?
And
you
the
know?
whole plague thing, we've done that.
Yeah.
No, we're done. In addition to everything else, all of these books, 2 books per year, writing through the pandemic, writing novellas, interviewing authors in London quite often, you told me.
Yeah,
You
I
appear.
do.
All right. In addition to all that, you recently revised the first 4 books in the Bones Season series.
I did, yeah.
Yeah. Creating the author's preferred text version.
Yes.
Why and how?
Yeah, I need to explain this because it's incredibly strange. And I think probably a lot of publishers hate me now because I know at least 2 other authors who've now persuaded their publishers to allow them to do that. And the way that they've excused this is by saying, well, Samantha Shannon did it. So it's L.R. Lamb, who's the author of Dragonfall. They've rewritten their pantomime series, so I think that's going to be republished this year.
Oh, wow. Good.
And then Elizabeth May, who wrote a book called The Falconer, has revised theirs, so it went from YA to new adult. Because that was how she originally wanted to write it, and I think her editor persuaded her otherwise. Anyway, the reason I did it was because, like I said, I was really, really young when I wrote The Bone Season. I was 19 when I wrote the draft, and for anyone who's followed my career for a really long time, like since the beginning, you might remember there was a really big media storm around me when I was first announced as this new author on the scene. I think it was a very slow news day. And the Sunday Times kind of pitched me as the next big thing. And I spent the next year doing just the wildest things, like stuff you wouldn't imagine, like, photo shoots with the New York Times magazine and Vogue, and like interviews with like these huge publications. I was doing TV, I was on BBC Breakfast, I was on like the Late Late Show in the States, which is insane. Like, what was I doing on that show? That's for actual celebrities. So I was doing all of this stuff, and I was also very, very introverted, and this was genuinely quite terrifying to me. Like, I could barely speak to people I didn't know, and now I was being faced with journalists and like actual like people who were competent and can socialize. So I was doing all this, and I was also trying to learn to be, to edit my books professionally. And I basically feel like I'd kind of dropped the ball on the editing of The Bone Season because of that, just given my age and just all of this stuff that was happening. And I always felt like I really let myself down in that, and I spent the next few years saying to people, I really want you to read the series because I love it so much, but you got to get through book 1. Book 1 is weird. And I was frustrated because I thought that The Bone Season could be so much stronger if I just had a bit more experience under my belt. The actual setup for The Bone Season is like incredibly strong. These 2 people who don't know if they can trust each other, and they have to slowly learn to do that. It's the setting of Oxford, which I loved, and I just felt could have been so much richer and so much more interesting. So in 2023, which is the 10th anniversary of The Bone Season, my publisher said they wanted to give it these beautiful new covers by Ivan Belikov, who did the Priory of the Orange Tree cover.
Amazing covers.
It's stunning. He's incredibly talented. I feel very lucky to have him working on my books. And I said to Bloomsbury, okay, well, how would you feel if I did some edits? And they said, okay, well, how many edits? I was like, oh, just a few. And they said, okay, why don't you do track changes on chapter 1, and we'll see how many changes you mean. Anyone who's used track changes will know that it turns every sentence a very aggressive shade of red when you change something. And by the time I gave the first chapter back to Bloomsbury, it was a bloodbath. And they were like, oh, okay, this is quite a lot of changes. I was like, yeah, how are we feeling about that? And surprisingly, they just let me do it. I think I had a look in my eye of someone who was like, almost, it was like a zealotry in this belief I had that it was going to be like brilliant, and I was going to, I really needed to revise this series. And I think I did it pretty well. I had learned lots of editing techniques over the last 10 years, and I feel like I just did it so much more justice when I went back to it, just because I knew better about how to write a book and how to convey information to a reader without info dumping. And I put in lots of jokes that I'd come up with years later and then kicked myself for not putting in. And I smoothed out the romance, and I just did a lot of things I'd been wanting to do for years. And then I ended up doing that across the whole series just to bring it stylistically in line. So yeah, if you haven't read the Bone Season series yet, please read the ones with the pretty floral covers, because those are the revised ones. And I would prefer that if you hadn't read them yet, that you started with those, because they're essentially the same story, but it's just, the style is just much stronger, I think. It feels more like the author who wrote The Priory of the Orange Tree, essentially.
And please buy those books from our friends at Back of Phoenix, who have wonderfully come and sold books here for us. Thank you, Becca.
Thank you.
I'm going to give you one more question, and I'm going to remind the audience that we're going to do a Q&A. So please have your questions ready for Samantha. What is the one thing that you want us to know about The Dark Mirror before we read it?
Ooh. It's the most romantic book in the Bone Season series, I will say. It's not. I wouldn't call the entire series romantasy. Like, it's not like that. It's not like so strong that the romance is like that much of a key element.
No, that's
the
a
books.
completely different genre.
Yeah, but I do. It is still a romance. The romance is still an important part of the series, if not the absolute main thing about it. And it's a very slow burn, enemies to lovers romance, and it is the most romantic book in the series so far, and I'm just very happy with how the romance goes in this one.
You're glowing. I
Thanks.
love it. That's amazing.
And I get like this when I talk about the Bone Season. I get all like,
yeah, that's great. Samantha Shannon, you have been the most fun.
Oh, thank you. Well, you've been a wonderful moderator.
Thank you. Thank you so much. A big hand for Samantha Shannon.